There is a specific moment that almost every person who has ever lived close to a narcissist remembers, and almost no one knows what to do with. It happens at a dinner, or in a kitchen, or in the front seat of a car. The conversation has been going on for some time. The narcissist has been talking the way the narcissist always talks, fluent, performative, slightly above the room. And then someone, almost always by accident, asks a single question. A small, ordinary question. The kind of question you would ask anyone. And the room changes. The narcissist's face does something it has not done before. Just for a fraction of a second. The smile holds, but the eyes go somewhere else. There is a pause that is one beat too long, and then they answer, but the answer does not match the question. It is the wrong answer to a different question. It is also delivered in a voice that has slightly too much edge in it. And by the time you have finished noticing what just happened, they have moved the conversation 3 subjects down the road, and you are sitting there wondering whether you imagined the whole thing. You did not imagine it. You just watched the mask fall for 3 seconds. Carl Jung spent 40 years in his clinical practice studying this exact moment. He documented it across hundreds of patients. He believed it was the single most useful diagnostic tool a psychologist had access to, and he believed that almost everyone who had ever loved a narcissist had used it at some point in their life by accident, and then convinced themselves it had not happened, because nobody had ever told them what they were seeing. Today, I want to tell you what you were seeing. I want to tell you what the question is, why it works, what the 4 reactions you will see in the first 3 seconds mean, and most importantly, and this is the part I have never seen anyone discuss properly, what to do after you have asked it. This video will not teach you how to weaponize a question. That is not the point. Jung used the question to identify what he was working with so that he could help his patient. We are going to use it for the same reason. To know what we are sitting across from, to stop guessing, to finally see clearly the shape of the thing that has been hurting us. By the end, you will know which of the 4 reactions belongs to the person you are thinking of right now, and you will know exactly what comes next. Let's begin where Jung began, with his diagnosis. Before we get to the question, you need to know that Carl Jung did not believe all narcissists were the same. This is the first place most modern psychology content goes wrong. Modern social media has flattened the word narcissist into a single label that gets applied to anyone who is selfish, anyone who interrupts you, anyone who talks too much about themselves. Jung would have refused to do this. In his clinical writings, especially in his late work after the publication of Ion in 1951, Jung was very precise about the fact that there are 2 completely distinct phenomena that look similar from the outside but require completely different responses from the person living near them. The first is the pathological narcissist. The pathological narcissist is the type most people mean when they use the word. This is someone whose self-structure is built around a single brittle internal image, what Jung called the persona, and whose entire psychological energy is organized around protecting that image from any contact with the truth of who they actually are underneath. The pathological narcissist does not have a real relationship to their own shadow. They have instead an enormous psychological investment in pretending the shadow does not exist. Everything they do, every conversation, every relationship, every public moment is calibrated to keep that pretense intact. When a pathological narcissist is asked a question that touches the gap between who they are pretending to be and who they actually are, they do not feel embarrassment. They feel annihilation. The question is not a question to them. It is, at the level of their nervous system, an attack on their right to exist. The reaction you see in their face in that 1-second pause is the reaction of someone whose entire identity has been threatened with collapse. The second type Jung documented is the wounded narcissist. The wounded narcissist is more common than the pathological one and harder to identify because they look more like ordinary people. The wounded narcissist structure is the same, an inflated persona that hides a fragile self underneath, but the inflation is not malicious. It is defensive. They built it because something happened in childhood that taught them, over and over, that the real version of them was not safe to show. So they constructed a confident, capable, successful version that the world would accept, and they have been performing it for so long that they have partly come to believe it themselves. When a wounded narcissist is asked the same question, they do not feel annihilation. They feel exposure. They feel suddenly, terribly seen, and the reaction in their face is also a 1-second pause, but it is a different pause. It is the pause of someone realizing that they have just been caught in a costume. These two pauses look identical from the outside. The question is the same. The first 3 seconds look the same. But what happens in the next 30 seconds, the next 30 minutes, and the next 30 years are completely different. The pathological narcissist will try to destroy you for what you saw. The wounded narcissist may eventually find their way to thanking you for it. Jung was not interested in the question because it could humiliate someone. He was interested in it because it could tell you, with almost no false positives, which of these two types you were dealing with, and therefore what kind of relationship you were actually in. So let's get to the question. The question Jung used was not a clever question. It was not a trap. It was not designed to be hostile, and the people who used it most effectively never delivered it in a hostile tone. That is part of why it works. The question, in its simplest form, is this. You ask the person calmly and directly, "What is one thing you got wrong about me when we first met?" That is the question. It does not look like much. It looks like the kind of slightly self-conscious question a thoughtful person might ask on a second date. It looks like an invitation to gentle self-reflection. A normal person, hearing it, will think for a second and offer something small and honest. They will say, "I thought you were quieter than you actually are," or "I thought you were going to be more guarded," or "Honestly, I thought you would be more like your sister and you are nothing like her." A normal answer takes between 6 and 15 seconds to construct. It is delivered with a slight smile. It is followed by a return question, asking you what you got wrong about them. This is what a healthy person does with this question. They look inside, find an honest small thing, hand it to you, and move on. The pathological narcissist cannot do this. Not at all. Not even slightly. The reason the pathological narcissist cannot do this is that the question requires 3 psychological capacities they do not have. It requires the ability to remember a previous version of you that was less accurate than the current version, which means admitting that the current version is also potentially incomplete. It requires the willingness to put a piece of internal vulnerability into the room, even a tiny one, and trust that the other person will not weaponize it. And it requires a real interior life that contains real impressions of other people, separate from the person's own self-image. The pathological narcissist has none of these. They do not remember a previous version of you because they have no real memory of you, only of how you have functioned in their internal narrative. They cannot put vulnerability into the room because every previous attempt at vulnerability ended in pain. And they have no interior life containing other people, because their interior life contains only themselves. So when you ask them the question, they cannot answer it. But they cannot say, "I cannot answer this either," because that would be a form of the very vulnerability the question demands. So they do something else. They do one of 4 things, and the thing they do tells you exactly what kind of psychology you are sitting across from. The reason Jung paid so much attention to the first 3 seconds of the response is that the first 3 seconds are pre-conscious. This is critical to understand. By the time you reach the 4th second, the narcissist has had enough time to compose a strategic response. They have processed the social weight of the question. They have started running their well-practiced repertoire of redirections, charm, deflections, and performative humility. By the 5th second, you are no longer seeing the person, you are seeing the persona doing its job. By the 10th second, the conversation has already been rerouted to safer ground, and the moment has passed. The first 3 seconds are different. The first 3 seconds are the time it takes for the question to land, for the unconscious to register what is being asked, and for the body to begin a defensive response before the conscious mind has had time to construct a polished version. In those 3 seconds, you are looking at the actual person underneath the act, and you are watching them figure out in real time that they have been asked something they cannot perform their way out of. This is why the question must be delivered calmly and casually. If you deliver it with intensity, with eye contact that is too direct, with a tone of voice that signals you are testing them, you have given them advance warning. They will deploy the defenses before the question lands. You will see only the polished response. The first 3 seconds will look the same as second 4, and you will learn nothing. The question must arrive like an ordinary question. It must arrive embedded in a normal conversation, ideally at a moment of warmth, when the person is comfortable enough that their defenses are slightly lowered. It must be delivered with a tone of mild curiosity, the same tone you would use to ask, "What kind of music do you listen to?" Then watch their face. In the first half second, you will see the question land. With most people, the eyes flicker briefly upward and to the side, the universal physical sign of memory retrieval. They are searching for an honest answer. With a pathological narcissist, the eyes do not go upward, they go inward. The face goes still. There is a quality Jung described as freezing in place, a brief paralysis that lasts perhaps half a second, and that most observers would not consciously notice but would subliminally register. Then, in the second half of the first second, the body begins to respond. With a normal person, the response is relaxation. With a narcissist, the response is bracing. Their shoulders tighten very slightly. Their breath catches. The smile that was on their face either freezes in place, locked into the previous expression, no longer responsive, or it disappears and is replaced by a different smile that does not match what just happened. By the second, the narcissist has begun executing one of 4 pre-conscious strategies for getting out of the question. By the third second, they are committed to it. By the fourth second, they are executing it skillfully. What strategy they choose tells you almost everything about what kind of narcissist you are looking at. So let's go through the 4. The first reaction Jung documented, and the most common in pathological narcissists, is anger. The anger is rarely loud. It is often disguised as something else. It will appear as a sudden change in tone, a sharp, irritated edge that was not there a moment ago. It may take the form of a question fired back at you with hostility. "Why are you asking me that?" Or it may take the form of a small, deliberate insult disguised as a joke. "Wow, that is a strange question. Are you in therapy or something?" Or, in the most pathological cases, it may take the form of a flat, contemptuous statement that effectively shuts down the conversation. "I do not really think about things like that." The anger response is the response of someone who experienced your question as an attack. The anger is the body's recoil from a perceived threat. It is also the most useful diagnostic, because it tells you with very high specificity that you are sitting across from someone whose self-structure is so fragile that even an ordinary gentle question feels like aggression. The second reaction is deflection. Deflection is the most charming and the hardest to detect because it is delivered with a smile and often with apparent insight. The narcissist will pause, look thoughtful, and then say something like, "What a fascinating question. You know, I think the more interesting question is what you got wrong about me." And then they will turn the question around with such grace that by the time you realize what just happened, you are now telling them what you got wrong about them, and they are nodding sympathetically, and the original question is gone. Deflection looks like generosity. It is not. It is a sophisticated rerouting of the conversation away from any moment in which the narcissist would have to look honestly at themselves. The pathological narcissist who uses deflection has usually been doing it for decades and has refined it into something that feels, to the other person, like emotional intimacy. It is the opposite of intimacy. It is the technical absence of intimacy disguised as its presence. The third reaction is the victim response. The victim response is what happens when the narcissist decides at the level of the unconscious that the question itself was unfair. They will pause. Their face will do a small softening, not a real softening, but a performed one. And they will say something like, "That is a really difficult question for me. I have been through so much in my life that I do not really know what people see when they meet me anymore." Or, "Honestly, the only thing people get wrong about me is how much I actually struggle. People assume I have it all together when I am really just trying to hold it together every day." This is the response of the wounded narcissist more than the pathological one, although both can use it. The victim response converts the question into an opportunity for the narcissist to receive sympathy. By the time you have finished hearing their answer, you are no longer thinking about the question. You are thinking about how hard their life has been. You are also, importantly, no longer in a position to ask anything else difficult because you would feel cruel doing so. The fourth reaction, and the rarest, is the vanish. The vanish is what happens when a pathological narcissist is asked the question in a context where they cannot get angry, cannot deflect skillfully, and cannot perform the victim role, usually because the social situation is too public or the relationship is too established for the ordinary defenses to work. In the vanish response, the narcissist simply goes blank. They will pause for 1 full second, sometimes 2. They will say something flat and non-committal, "I am not really sure," and then immediately and aggressively change the subject. The change of subject will not be smooth. It will be obvious. It will leave a small, awkward hole in the conversation that everyone present will feel, but no one will name. The vanish is the most diagnostic of the 4 reactions, because it is the closest you will ever come to seeing the real person underneath the persona. For a brief moment, the persona could not respond, and there was nothing else there to take its place. What you saw in that pause was the actual interior of the narcissist. It is, almost always, an empty room. If you have ever watched someone do the vanish, you remember it. You remember the small chill it gave you. You remember telling yourself afterward that you were imagining things. You were not imagining things. You were briefly looking at the truth of who they were, and the truth of who they were was a person who was not really there. These are the 4 reactions. Most narcissists will use a primary one and a secondary one, depending on the social context. The pathological narcissist tends to default to anger or vanish. The wounded narcissist tends to default to deflection or victim. Once you know what you are looking at, you cannot unsee it. Now we come to the part of this video that I have never seen another psychology channel address properly, and that is, in my view, the most important part. If you have lived close to a narcissist for a long time, the question you have been asking yourself privately is not, what kind of narcissist are they? The question you have been asking yourself is, why me? Of all the people they could have built a life with, why did they pick me? And why have I stayed? The answer, which Jung documented in his clinical writing on the anima and the projection mechanism, is this. The narcissist did not choose you randomly, and you did not stay randomly. You were chosen because you have a specific psychological capacity that the narcissist needed, and you stayed because the narcissist gave you, in return, a specific psychological function that you needed. This is what Jung called the mirror dynamic. Here is how it works. The narcissist's empty interior, the missing real self that should have been there but is not, has to be experienced by them somehow. They cannot fully suppress the awareness of the emptiness. Some part of them knows, so they unconsciously seek out a person whose own psychological structure can mirror back to them an image of the person they want to be. They need, in other words, a witness. Not just any witness, a specific kind of witness. The witness they need has 3 qualities. First, the witness must be capable of seeing what others miss. Must be, in plain language, an empath, an introverted intuitive, the kind of person who can read a room before anyone has spoken. Second, the witness must have a history of taking responsibility for other people's emotional states. Must be someone who, when there is tension in a room, instinctively moves to soothe it rather than name it. And third, the witness must have, somewhere in their own psychology, a deep belief that being needed is the same thing as being loved. If you have been close to a narcissist, you know without my having to say it that this is your psychology. You did not get into this relationship because you have bad judgment. You got into this relationship because you have an unusual psychological gift, and the narcissist unconscious recognized that gift the moment they met you. You were exactly the witness they had been looking for their entire life. They organized their pursuit of you with a precision that, looking back, almost seems like fate. It was not fate. It was the recognition of a function. And you stayed because the narcissist gave you something in return that you had been looking for your entire life. They gave you a role in which your gift mattered. They gave you a person whose interior, whether changed visibly in response to your attention, which gave you the felt sense, for the first time, sometimes, that what you noticed was real. They gave you a relationship in which you were structurally indispensable, which gave you the felt sense that you were finally safe. This is the mirror dynamic in a single sentence. They needed someone who could see them. You needed someone who proved that what you saw was real. The cruel paradox is that the narcissist, by virtue of being a narcissist, cannot actually receive what you give. The seeing you do bounces off the persona and never reaches the real person underneath, because there is no real person underneath who can receive it. And the proof you receive, the proof that what you see is real, is also a kind of trick. The narcissist's emotional reactions are not about what you see, they are about what you mirror back. The conversation that feels intimate is not intimate. It is an extremely sophisticated feedback loop. When you ask the question, you are also collecting evidence about your own life. You are confirming that the relationship you have been in is the relationship you have suspected for a long time it was. This is often the moment when something inside you that has been quietly waiting begins to wake up. So you have asked the question. You have watched the 3 seconds. You have identified which of the 4 reactions belongs to the person across from you. You now know with much higher confidence than you had before what you have been living with. What you do in the next 24 hours is the part that determines everything. The mistake almost everyone makes, the mistake that Jung documented dozens of times in his case notes and that he warned every patient about, is to confront the narcissist with what you just saw. To say in some form, I noticed what happened when I asked you that question. I think we need to talk about it. Do not do this. I will say it again because it is the most important sentence in this video. Do not confront the narcissist with what you saw. The reason has nothing to do with their feelings. The reason is that the narcissist's defensive system is now activated. You have shown them, accidentally or not, that you are capable of seeing through the persona. From their unconscious's point of view, you have just become dangerous. The next thing they will do, and they will do it with a sophistication that will surprise you because they have been preparing this response for years without knowing it, is begin to systematically discredit you. Not violently, not all at once. Slowly, over the next weeks and months, in small, hard-to-pin-down moves. If you confront them, you give them the entire script. You tell them exactly what you saw, exactly what worried you, and exactly what you are going to do next. They will use every piece of that information to construct a counter-narrative in which you are the unstable one, the paranoid one, the person who imagines things. By the time you have realized what is happening, your own confidence in your perception will have been damaged, and you will be more uncertain than you were before you ever asked the question. So what do you do instead? You do nothing visible. You do everything internal. You do not change your behavior toward the narcissist in any way they can detect. You do not become colder. You do not become more questioning. You do not bring up the moment again. You do not especially tell them what you suspect. What you do privately is begin to reorganize your own life around the new information. You start to make the small structural changes that will give you, over the next 3 to 12 months, the freedom to act on what you now know. If you live with them, you start putting financial reserves into a place they cannot see. If you work with them, you quietly begin building the relationships and credentials that would let you leave. If you are emotionally entangled, you start, very quietly, rebuilding the parts of your life that the narcissist has slowly eroded. The friendships you stopped seeing because they did not approve. The hobbies you abandoned. The family members you stopped calling. You do this slowly. You do this without announcement. You do this on a timeline of months, not days, because the narcissist has been calibrating the relationship around their version of you for a long time, and any sudden change will trigger an alarm in their unconscious that you do not want to set off until you are ready. When you are ready, and you will know when, you will be in a position to make a real decision about what to do with the relationship. You may decide to leave. You may decide to stay but renegotiate the terms in a way the narcissist cannot easily refuse. You may decide that, knowing what you know, you can stay in the relationship in a different way that protects you. All of these are valid choices. None of them are available to you while you are still living inside the narcissist's narrative. The question, then, is not a weapon. It is a key. It opens a door inside you. What you do with the room behind the door is the work of the next year of your life. This is the part Carl Jung spent his late career writing about, and it is the part nobody on the internet talks about, and it is the only part that actually matters. There is one more thing I want to leave you with, and it is the observation Jung made in the last decade of his life that I think about most. Jung wrote near the very end that the people who have lived close to a narcissist almost always, eventually, expect a moment of closure. They expect a confrontation. They expect an apology. They expect, at the very minimum, a moment in which the narcissist looks at them honestly and acknowledges what happened. Jung wrote that this moment never comes. The pathological narcissist will never apologize, not in any real sense. They may produce something that looks like an apology, words arranged in the shape of an apology, but the apology will be hollow, and the moment after they deliver it, they will resume the previous behavior with no internal change. The structural reason is simple. The apology would require the narcissist to acknowledge the gap between the persona and the real self, and the entire architecture of their psychology exists to prevent that acknowledgement. The wounded narcissist may eventually, in rare cases, do real work and arrive at something close to a real apology. But this almost never happens inside the relationship that broke. It happens later with someone else after years of work, and even then it usually does not get communicated back to the people who suffered the original injury. This is the part that, when people first hear it, hits hardest. The closure you are waiting for is not coming. There will be no scene. There will be no reckoning. There will be no moment in which they finally see what they did to you and weep. What there will be, if you do the work, is something else. There will be a slow return to yourself. There will be a morning, probably about 18 months after you have begun the internal reorganization, when you wake up and notice that you have not thought about the narcissist in 3 days. There will be an afternoon, 6 months after that, when you realize that the version of you who needed someone else to confirm that what you were seeing was real is no longer the version of you who is running your life. And there will be, eventually, an evening Jung described it in his case notes as the evening of the 3rd year, when you sit alone and notice that the whole thing has receded into a part of your life that is finished, and that you are no longer the person it happened to. You are the person it happened to who became someone else. That is the closure. It does not look like the closure you wanted. It is a much better closure than the one you wanted. If this resonated, the next video lives in the same chamber. Subscribe. The full reading list is in the description. Jung's Ion, Kohut on the analysis of the self, Kernberg on borderline conditions, and Jung's late letters. If you want to go deeper, start there. I want to leave you with the same question Jung used to leave with his patients at the end of this conversation. If you knew today exactly what you were dealing with, no more guessing, no more hoping you were wrong, what is the first small change you would make in your life this week? Take your time with it. I'll see you in the next one.